morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR and welcome back to another video. So I'm sure most of you know there are 18 Pokemon types, but sadly not all types were created equal. Depending on the lineup of gyms, Elite Four, and some other factors, some types stick out like a sore thumb in certain regions for just being generally underwhelming. Which is why today I'll be analyzing the first 4 regions to find out which type is the worst in every single one of them, and eventually we will also do the last 4 regions. I just don't want this video to be a half hour long, I feel like I'd lose a lot more people that way, and I also just can't talk that long, so if you're not subscribed and you want to be in the loop for when part 2 drops, make sure you do subscribe. 90% of people who watch these videos are not subscribed, so let's work on that. We are also on the road to 100,000 subscribers, which feels crazy to say, so be sure to tell everyone and join the movement in the process. Anyhow, starting with the Kanto region, this one is pretty easy to determine. Sorry to all the bug catchers out there, but it's the bug type. Of course, this is back in the day when bugs were basically considered the beginner's type, the Pokemon that evolve fast to be just useful enough for the beginning of the game, and really only the beginning. If we take a closer look at Kanto's gym leaders, Bug will flat out lose against Brock, go even against Misty and Surge, and actually do worse than you think against Erica, due to the fact that 2 out of Erica's 3 Pokemon are part Poison type, which in Generation 1 is one of Bug's many weaknesses. In fact, in the entire Celadon gym, Erica's Tangela and Beauty Lori's Execute are the only 2 Pokemon which Bug types have a true advantage against. The rest they actually struggle with quite considerably. Now this gym may be easier for users of Butterfree or Scyther, but only because they're both part Flying type. It has nothing to do with their bug characteristics. Every other Gen 1 bug type, which includes Pinsir, Beedrill, Parasect, and Venomoth, is in for a much rougher time. Same exact thing goes for Koga's gym, except harder in every conceivable way. Maybe you'll get some usage out of Butterfree and Venomoth psychic type moves here, but more than likely you'd be better off relying on a different type of Pokemon altogether. Sabrina I have marked as another disadvantage for Bug, even though Bug actually beats psychic types on paper. But the fact of the matter is, unless you're playing the Let's Go games, in both Gen 1 and the Gen 3 remakes Fire Red and Leaf Green, Bug types learn next to nothing useful. Parasect has a base 20 power leech life, Pinsir learns absolutely no bug moves at all, Butterfree won't learn Silver Wind until level 47 in Gen 3, which is possible to get by Sabrina, but not recommended, and all the rest of them are part Poison type, which means Sabrina will have no problem tearing them apart with her psychic powers. So despite having a type advantage in theory, Bugs still lose this gym as well. But the losing streak doesn't end there, as Blaine will have no problem at all scorching every bug type in Kanto, and even Giovanni's ground types are mostly unfazed by bug resistance. Parasect actually does have a pretty decent shot at taking down Giovanni, but I'd be more concerned for your mental state at that point after using Parasect for an entire playthrough. In the Elite Four, things don't look much better. They go mostly even against Lorelei. They should theoretically beat Bruno, but he has rock-type coverage on nearly every Pokemon, so don't get your hopes up too high, especially if you're still hanging on to Butterfree or Scyther. Agatha is actually more of a Poison-type user than a Ghost-type user, so that's yet another L for the Bugs, especially considering that she has Golbat on her team, which any of the Bugs of Kanto should consider themselves lucky if they even get to graze it. And Lance's largely Flying-type team spells total disaster for the Bugs, ending off their rather unremarkable run through Kanto. Oh, and for some extra credit, Team Rocket, the original team of Kanto, primarily uses Poison types, making bug types even more useless. Now, the Bugs are a teensy bit better in the Let's Go game, since they gain access to X-Scissor, U-Turn, and a considerably buffed Leech Life, as well as no longer being weak to Poison types, but the list ends there. They are still easily the worst type in all of Kanto. With all these factors considered, bug types win against 0 of Kanto's type specialists, they go even against 4 of them, and lose to 8. Looking at this chart that I compiled using the same criteria that I used for the Bugs, it's not even clear what the next worst type would be. It's barely a competition at all. Now you may notice that many of these boxes don't line up with the type chart, like Rock beating Lieutenant Surge or Fighting losing against Erica, but that is because these advantages are all being considered with the species of Pokemon available by that point in the game, the fact that most Rock types in Kanto are also part Ground, most Grass types are part Poison, the Pokemon on the gym leaders teams, etc. So if some of these judgments don't make sense to you at first, I'd encourage you to research the Pokemon, their availability, and their movesets to see where my logic is coming from. And if there's a gray bar, that just means that type of Pokemon isn't available through normal means by that point in the game yet. And if you couldn't tell, it's primarily based on Fire Red and Leaf Green, since Dark and Fairy types have very little impact on Let's Go, plus Let's Go is just a generally easier game. And finally, we move on to the Johto region, and I'm sorry to say it, Chikorita fans, but it's easily the grass type here. Before we even get into the gym leaders, first we have to discuss just how problematic fully evolved grass type Pokemon are in Johto to begin with. Meganium is easily the best one, but aside from it, your other options are limited to Jumpluff, Blossom, and Sunflora. That's it, that's all you get in Generation 2, and none of them are particularly good Pokemon. Pokemon like Vileplume, Victory Bell, and Exeggutor are all off the table since you don't get any Leaf Stones until the post-game. Fortunately, Heart Gold and Soul Silver fixes this by adding the Pokeathlon Dome for easier stone acquisition, and also adds Tangrowth to the pool of fully evolved grass types, which effectively doubles your options. But just wait, we got more bad news coming. Right off the bat, Grass loses to both Falkner and Bugsy without much room for rebuttal. On top of that, Sprout Tower is the first major area in the game specializing in certain Pokemon, which happen to be Bellsprout and Hoot, which are notably bad for grass types. Team Rocket is also still looming around, which is just as bad for grass types as it was for Bugs in Gen 1. They get off easy against Whitney, or at least as easy as you can against her, but things quickly turn against them with Morty. Although he's a ghost-type gym leader, every single trainer there, including himself, specifically uses the Ghastly Evolution line, which I shouldn't even have to explain why that's a bad thing. You know, I'll be nice and give them the slightest of advantages over Chuck's gym, since his ace happens to be Poliwrath, a water fighting type, and you can make use of grass types who are part poison, or Jumpluff who is part flying to make things a lot easier. But then we're gonna take back-to-back L's against Jasmine and Price's gym. Price is a little more arguable since many of the Pokemon in that gym are part water or ground, but you'd still be far better off using any other type that just straight up beats ice. Along the way, there's also the Whirl Islands to consider where most trainers use water types, but gotcha, most of them are either Tentacruel or Mantine, meaning you're just far better off using an electric type for this leg of the journey. And then we have the Rocket HQ and the Radio Tower takeover with dozens upon dozens of Rocket Grunts and Admins to fight through. Don't bring grass types here. Grass types are barely usable in Claire's gym despite her ace being Kingdra, plus she has Fire Blast or Ice Beam on one of her Dragonairs just waiting for you depending on which game you're playing. Heading into the league, grass types are actually quite useless against Will, since 4 out of his 5 Pokemon will have no problem dealing with them. Same story with Koga, except he's packing both poison and bug types now, which is just yikes. Bruno is a tough one because while he does have a free kill for grass types with Onix, his Hitmonchan has coverage and they also give his Hitmonlee Blaze Kick in the remakes. But again, most grass types have a secondary type that resists fighting. I'm gonna call this one even. Karen is yet another L. Between Vileplume, Murkrow, Gengar, and Houndoom, grass types lose to 4 out of the 5 for Pokemon in a pretty big way. And finally, Lance, who again uses more flying types than dragon types, will send any of your remaining grass types to an early grave. So let's recap. Grass beats 1 type specialist, being Chuck, goes even against Whitney and Bruno, and loses the remaining 10 matchups, on top of dealing with Team Rocket and other problematic areas along the way. For those of you keeping score at home, grass types perform even worse in Johto than bug types did in Kanto. In fact, I doubt any of the remaining 6 regions will be able to top this monumental failure. But I guess if there's any consolation prize, if you used Chikorita for the entire game and made it work, then you truly are a Pokemon master. Going into the Hoenn region, things tighten up a little bit more, but once again, I'm sorry to say that bug type gets the short end of the stick. Like grass types in Gen 2, the main issue with bugs in Hoenn is that there just aren't many good ones. Pinsir, Heracross, and Armaldo are decent, but then you look at the alternatives. Volbeat, Illumise, Masquerain, Shedinja, Ninjask, Dustox, and Beautifly. Not exactly a thrilling bunch. Bugs lose to Roxanne, slightly win against Brawly, but you could just be using a flying or psychic type instead. Lose to Flannery, lose to Winona, and like Sabrina, they should beat Liza and Tate, but realistically they don't since they come prepared with dual rock types complete with Flamethrower and Rock Slide, though it varies in which game you play. The only notable victory they get in the entire game is against Sydney in the league before they go back to just taking up space in your party, because trust me, you will not be using them for any of the other league members. Fighting type is just infinitely better at filling their role, which makes Heracross realistically the only viable bug in Hoenn. Also, if you play Ruby or Omega Ruby versions, then Team Magma is out to make your life a whole lot worse. Also, at the risk of resurrecting a beat-to-death meme, there is so much water in Hoenn, mostly filled with users of Tentacruel and Pelipper, who bugs can't do much against. Bug types beat 2 type specialists, go even with 4, and lose to 6 in Hoenn, which is a big step up from Kanto, but still not enough to save them. But I don't want to pick on bug types too much, because there are some strange, dishonorable mentions for the Hoenn region that I wanted to bring up, being the Psychic and Dragon types, 2 types that normally dominate most regions. Psychic only wins against Brawly and has a pretty tough time doing anything else for the rest of the game, which seems odd considering that Gardevoir is usually a lock for most Hoenn trainers' teams, even before Fairy type was invented. Though Gardevoir is arguably the best Psychic type that you can obtain, discounting Metagross, who usually isn't available through the main story, discounting the ORAS launch event obviously. Psychic is generally way better in ORAS though, thanks to the advent of Mega Evolution helping out Gardevoir, Medicham, Alakazam, Metagross, and heck, they even throw in a free Mega Latios or Latias during the main story, so it's not that bad, just uncharacteristically underwhelming for most of Hoenn's main story. As for Dragon, since you realistically won't get one until after Flannery's gym, unless you're a compulsive grinder who really wants that Vibrava, Dragon gives you no advantages over anybody in the main story. They also struggle quite a bit against Glacia, Steven, and potentially Drake all in the Hoenn League, which makes them not as solid of a pick as they usually are. Again, these 2 types aren't nearly as bad as Bug, but they are unusually off their game here. Now, I'll be honest, Sinnoh was the first decently hard one to make a choice for. I don't think there are any types in Sinnoh that stick out as being particularly useless like in the previous 3 regions. Ice is a bit of a lame duck type here since you can't obtain any Ice types until after the 6th gym, meaning some of their best and worst gyms are already behind them by that point. Dragon is also a little weird here, discounting legendaries. There are only 2 fully evolved dragons that you can get in Sinnoh. One of them is Altaria, but of course the other one is Garchomp, so that speaks for itself. Normal is also quite underwhelming here, losing against 3 gyms and not faring too well against champion Cynthia. Snorlax, Staraptor, and Togekiss are really the only standout normal types in Sinnoh, though Togekiss has since been retconned as a fairy type, so forget about that option whenever a remake happens. But even so, Normal is such a versatile type that I can't definitively say it's the worst. I mean, B-Barrel does exist after all. So if I had to choose a worse type for Sinnoh, it would have to be Poison. Poison on paper loses to Rourke, but at that point in the game your only options are Badoo or Zubat, which could go either way, so we'll call it a wash. Poison does squeak out a decent W against Gardenia, being able to take down 2 out of Gardenia's 3 Pokemon quite easily, and if you have Golbat or Dustox by this point, the entire gym should be quite easy. But the good news for Poison sadly ends there. Poison is of very little use in Fantina's gym, especially with her Mismagius learning Psybeam, and although Poison should have an advantage against fighting types, the Veilstone gym is more than prepared for them, with most trainers packing a Meta-type, including gym leader Maylene, in addition to her Lucario knowing the ground-type move Bone Rush. Poison still helps against the numerous Machoke in that gym, which is why I'll call it even instead of a total loss though. Byron is total bad news for Poison types though, being immune to their best attacks, and additionally, many of the Steel types in Byron's gym are part ground or psychic, making their journey all the more difficult. The rest of the gyms are largely uneventful for Poison types, but they have a terrible run through the Sinnoh League. Again, they should beat Aaron, but his Pokemon all have enough offensive coverage to get around Poison's resistance to Bug, plus his Scizor and Drapion proved to be daunting obstacles for Poison to overcome. Poison outright loses to Bertha's ground types. They go neutral against Flint, though many of Sinnoh's Poison types have some trouble with fire, such as Roserade, Dustox, and even Toxicroak due to dry skin. But since Pokemon like Tentacruel and the others are on the table, we'll still mark it as even. And for lack of a better word, they get eviscerated by Lucian and his psychic types. Poison also offers next to no help at all against Cynthia, unless they keep Togekiss on her team in the remake, since it will become a fairy type. Poison types are also of negligible assistance against Team Galactic, their commanders, and most importantly, their boss Cyrus. But again, I don't want to make it sound worse than it really is for Poison types. For the record, Sinnoh's Pokedex contains a number of good ones, including Roserade, Crobat, Gengar, Drapion, Toxicroak, and Tentacruel. The only ones that are somewhat underwhelming stat-wise are Dustox and Skuntank, but even Skuntank's dark typing makes it a somewhat reliable pick. With such a good selection, you're much better off being stuck with Sinnoh's Poison types over the worst types from Kanto, Johto, or Hoenn. Anyway, if we include Cynthia and Cyrus, despite not being true type specialists, Poison's record is 1 winning matchup, 6 losing matchups, and 7 even matchups. Not awful, but still lagging a bit behind the rest of the crowd. So that'll wrap things up for part 1 of the worst type in every region. Again, make sure you're subscribed so you'll be one of the first to see when part 2 drops, covering the Unova through Galar regions. And who knows, if this does really well, maybe we'll do the same thing for the best types. That's all for now, be sure to like if you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.